of Marlene Castonguay. Congratulations to my little cousin from the Garcette Lime of Cap-à-la-Branche. We are all so proud of you.
Order. The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Conflict of interest Carbon Tax Carney has officially joined the corrupt Liberal government as the de facto finance minister, here to ram the Davos agenda down the throats of Canadians. This global elite jet sets around the world, claiming the carbon tax scam is a global example that no one should be exempt from, including Atlantic Canadians. He sits on boards of multinational corporations with interests for foreign oil, for foreign governments, opposing Canada's good, clean, responsible oil and gas. The Prime Minister has shielded him from Canadian disclosure laws by making him an advisor instead of replacing this lame duck finance minister. Carbon Tax Carney is here for Carbon Tax Carney, here for all the power and money and none of the accountability. He could care less about Canadians who can't afford to feed, heat or house themselves. Common sense Conservatives are calling on the Prime Minister to force Carbon Tax Carney to be sworn in as a public office holder, so he has to follow Canada's conflict of interest laws. Time to come clean. Conflict of interest, Carbon Tax Carney.
The honourable member from Sydney, Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, on September 17, 1999, Donald Marshall Jr. stood victorious in his case that affirmed the Mi'kmaq had a treaty right to sell fish according to the terms of the Peace and Friendship Treaties. This historic case changed the economic future for the Mi'kmaq. Not only could treaties be used to survive, but now they were able to thrive. Thousands of Mi'kmaq jobs have been created within the fisheries, allowing Mi'kmaq to become major players within the Atlantic fisheries. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we have a long way to go in full implementation of the Mi'kmaq treaties, but we continue to work with Mi'kmaq communities to ensure they can exercise their right to a living while balancing conservation and safety. We remember the Marshall case as a turning point for the Mi'kmaq and how it cemented the legacy of Donald Marshall Jr. as a hero for our people. Today, I remember my late friend Junior and honor all those who continue to advocate for their treaty rights moving forward. Lalaliek, thank you.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable leader of the opposition, l'honorable chef de l'opposition.
Les électeurs.
Voters in Liberal strongholds in Toronto and Montreal have rendered their verdict. This Prime Minister, after 9 years, is not worth the cost. After 9 years of this Bloc Liberal government, we've seen the greatest expansion in the federal government in history, the most expensive centralizing government, including when it comes to the cost of housing and groceries in Quebec. How can the Bloc keep this government in power when it's so bad for Quebec? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'm so happy to have the opportunity to answer a question that has to do with the Canadian economy, because it gives me the opportunity to celebrate some good news that we got this morning. Inflation was 2%, and that's back to pre-pandemic levels. It's such good news for our country. Conservatives should be celebrating that. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure people who are waiting on waiting lists for food banks or lineups for food banks, or who are living in camps or homeless shelters, they'll be celebrating today. They'll really be celebrating the fact that after the highest inflation in 40 years, prices are still going up. They're not going back down. So the question is, why does the Bloc want to keep the most centralizing, expensive government in power when they have no respect for Quebec's jurisdiction or for Quebecers? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is showing once again that he's incompetent when it comes to the economy. The fact is that the 2% level is where Canada was before the pandemic. The fact is that since the beginning of this year, inflation was within the Bank of Canada's target range. The fact is that for 19 months now, wages have outstripped inflation. But Conservatives just want bad news for Canadians.
Leader of the Opposition.
Canadians in the former Liberal strongholds of Toronto and Montreal have now given their verdict. After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Taxes up, costs up, crime's up, time's up. Mr. Speaker, isn't it time for Canadians to have a chance to render their verdict right across the country, electing a common-sense Conservative government that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime?
I ask members, especially members on the far side of the House, to please not to take the microphone until they're recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to have the chance to talk about the economy. That is because today we had good news for Canadians. Inflation is back down to where it was before COVID hit. Inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range this whole year. Wages have outpaced inflation for 19 months in a row. But the Conservatives don't want to talk about it. They are so weak and spiteful that for them, good news for Canadians is bad news that they want to ignore.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, this incompetent finance minister would tell you that you should celebrate that after prices rising faster than at any time in 40 years, they continue to rise, just not as quickly. I'm sure the people living in tent encampments, or the record-smashing 2 million people lined up at food banks, or the 1 in 4 kids going to school hungry after 9 years of this government will be celebrating. But what we now find out is that it's worse than we thought. According to a document just released, the government's second carbon tax will cost $9 billion in lost GDP. Why won't we have a carbon tax election to decide?
The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I think we all know why the Conservatives are so panicked about an election. It's because they can see that the economic news is good. They can see that we are now back to exactly where we were before COVID hit. They can see the Bank of Canada has lowered interest rates 3 times in a row, and wages have been ahead of inflation for 19 months. That's good news for Canadians. It's bad news for Conservatives.
And once again, I apologize. Normally, I would indicate out of respect to all members by saying the Honourable, and I forgot to do that in this case. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The bad news is we now have 1,800 homeless encampments in Ontario. Shame. 35 in Halifax alone. 2 million Canadians lined up at food banks after 9 years of NDP Liberal government. And now that we learn that on top of the $25 billion annual hit of the first carbon tax to our GDP, the second carbon tax will subtract another $9 billion a year. Over $35 billion in lost GDP. That's almost $2,000 per family. Why won't this costly NDP Liberal government allow Canadians to vote on the carbon tax?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to have the chance to talk about housing because there is more good news Canadians should know about. And that is that we have extended to 30 years amortizations for all first-time home buyers. That means more young Canadians can buy that first home and afford afford that mortgage. We've extended to 30 years amortizations for all new homes. That's to encourage what we know we all need, more homes built faster. But these weak and spiteful Conservatives cannot celebrate good news for Canadians because it's bad news for their partisan interests.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be able to answer the question from the Leader of the Opposition, but I'll answer this way. 4th place in La Salle et Maire Verdun. So we're still working on the seniors file and doing so well that we're going to have to make room for one more seat on our benches. Is this government in favor of C-319, and will they ensure that this bill, which everyone in the House voted for, makes it all the way through? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for that question. Our government understands the importance of supporting our seniors, and that's what we've done. And what we've done from the outset. That's what we did after 10 years of the Conservatives who punished our seniors. That's why we added supports for our seniors, especially for the most vulnerable seniors, as was the right thing to do. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. C-319 is a block bill that would eliminate the discrimination in the OAS for seniors aged 65 to 74 and those 75 and over, and instead of allowing for $5,000 to $6,000 in wages without losing the GIS. At committee, all parties voted in favor of our bill. Now, will the government ensure that this bill gets implemented because it requires a royal recommendation? Will the Liberals give that recommendation and support seniors, yes or no? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge clearly that the oldest seniors, those at 75 and over, have higher costs and are more vulnerable. That is why we added support for them. And I share with the Bloc a concern for our seniors, and that's why I would ask the Bloc to support us when it comes to dental care. That's an important program for all Quebecers, and especially for vulnerable seniors. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The Liberals have let people down again and again, and they are done. It's clear from the results of the election last night. The Liberals are done. Maybe it's because they keep on teaming up with the Conservatives to let greedy CEOs continue to rip off Canadians. In fact, inflation numbers show that grocery greed has driven up the food prices more than 21% in the past 3 years. Why did the Liberals team up with the Conservatives to protect greedy CEOs from a price cap on food essentials?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the NDP and indeed all members of this House will set partisanship aside for one moment to congratulate Canadians at the light at the end of the tunnel, at the fact that after an extremely challenging time with COVID and its economic aftermath, inflation is back to where it was before COVID first hit. When it comes to taxes, we believe that those who have the most capacity should pay their fair share, and we've acted on that.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Liberals have continued to team up with the Conservatives to let grocery greed drive up the price of food, and that's got to stop.
Yesterday, it became clear that people are finished with the Liberals. It's because they worked with the Conservatives to allow real estate giants hike rents by over 20%. Why do the Liberals keep teaming up with the Conservatives and allowing these giants rip people off? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
I don't think anybody listening to Question Period today, or frankly any day, imagines that the Liberals are teaming up with the Conservatives. Or that we agree with them about very much at all. They are the party of privilege and austerity. We are the party of people. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we have asked those at the very top to pay their fair share so that we can support Canada and Canadians.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
It's day 2 in the House as the first female finance minister, again, is being publicly humiliated by the fake feminist prime minister. What's worse is that she's being replaced by an unelected man outside of her own caucus who her boss is now shielding from conflict of interest laws that allow him to take her job and keep his money. A man who works against our resource sector, who exports jobs to China while championing higher carbon taxes on heating and eating for Canadians. Why won't the finance minister talk to her boss about ending the personal attacks on her own credibility?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to have the chance to talk about feminism, because I know what a feminist government looks like. A feminist government builds the first national system of early learning and childcare. Makes contraceptives free, and a feminist government ensures that every single woman in Canada has full control over her body. Until the Conservatives stand up to that, they have no right to talk about
it. The honourable member from Thornhill.
Fake feminist prime minister throws his finance minister under the bus with all the other ministers. The real record of this finance minister is record smashing 1 million people visiting a food bank in her province. In Ontario, 1 in 4 Canadians living in poverty. Canadians now spend more in taxes than they do on housing, on food, and on clothes combined. No wonder they're putting the training wheels back on for her. She can tell that to the Prime Minister.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I've stood up to Trump, and I have stood up to Putin. Juvenile, playground insults from the wannabe MAGA maple syrup conservatives do not frighten me at all. But what I think is really interesting is that they don't actually want to talk about the economy. And that's because good economic news for Canadians is bad news for them. How pathetic that they put their own partisan interest first.
The honourable member from Haldimand Norfolk.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and now time is up. This self-proclaimed feminist prime minister has repeatedly shoved aside strong women who have stood up to him. Now the prime minister is replacing the first ever female finance minister with an unelected Mark Carbon Tax Carney. Why is this finance minister allowing herself to be publicly humiliated in this manner?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, It is a bit rich to hear the member of the Conservative Party pretend to care about feminism when their own leader was using misogynistic hashtags on their videos to attract men who hate women. Mr. Speaker, it was anything but feminist when they bring forward backdoor legislation to ban abortion and to take away women's right to choose their own rights, Mr. Speaker, or when they all voted against increased funding to combat gender-based violence or to support survivors. Mr. Speaker, their leader doesn't care about women or equality. He only cares about himself.
The honourable member from Haldimand Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, it's so sad. They're not even allowing the finance minister to answer because they all...
Order! Order! The honourable member from Haldimand Norfolk, from the top, please.
From the top? Mr. Speaker, they're not even allowing the finance minister to answer her own questions because they all know that the carbon tax is a failure. Canadians are suffering. There are over 1,800 homeless encampments in Ontario alone. 26% of Canadians are saying that they are considering leaving the country because it is too expensive. A single mother in Kingston reported paying 100% of her income in rent. Will this finance minister admit that the Prime Minister has lost confidence in her and Canadians have lost confidence in this government?
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives keep talking about women, but they don't support policies that support women.
Right.
Why are they against affordable childcare? If they care about that single mother, they should be supporting affordable childcare. Mr. Speaker, if they care about women's economic freedom, they should be supporting childcare. If they care about women's rights, they should be supporting a woman's right to choose. The real fake feminists, Mr. Speaker, are the people who sit on that side of the aisle.
Right.
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Island and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. This Prime Minister's new de facto finance minister, Carbon Tax Carney, has massive conflicts of interest, including multiple foreign investment firms. Canadians don't know how much he personally stands to profit from the advice that he's giving to the Prime Minister. It's more blatant corruption from this NDP Liberal government. So will the Prime Minister simply have Carbon Tax Carney sworn in as a public office holder so that the full extent of Canada's disclosure laws apply to him too?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we do believe in listening to experts from across the country. But let's talk about where the Conservatives get their ideas. The Conservative leader gets his advice on helping Canadians with their grocery bills from a Loblaws lobbyist. He gets his advice on Ukraine from Elon Musk and from Tucker Carlson. And he has courted the support of misogynists and cozied up to the far right. Those are the advisors Canadians should be really concerned about.
The honourable member from Regina Capel has stood in this place and understands the importance of calling members to order so that those who do have the floor have the opportunity to address the House. The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It's absolutely absurd to hear the finance minister give anyone lessons about who they're taking advice from. Arch-liberal elitist Mark Carney. This guy has more conflicts than the twice guilty and convicted Prime Minister of their party. And they're letting Carbon Tax Carney keep all the money and all the power by covering up his massive conflicts of interest while giving away that finance minister's job. He makes millions from foreign investment firms, and now he's advising the Prime Minister. So why is the Prime Minister letting Carbon Tax Carney keep the money and the power and serving as the real finance minister?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely shameful what the Conservatives are doing. When there is a Canadian who doesn't agree with their vision for Canada, what do? Attack them. Whether it's anybody who doesn't agree with what the Conservatives do, the only thing they know how to do is denigrate that person. Mr. Speaker, we should be able to disagree without being disagreeable. We should be able to hear advice from a whole wide range of actors without attacking their character and bringing down fellow Canadians. They should be ashamed of their actions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very good.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring something to the government's attention, something that won't happen. The Bloc will not agree to tolerating encroachment on Quebec's jurisdiction in exchange for this or that. That won't happen. The Liberal government has to be consistent. They should implement a bill that they voted for. It's got to be one of two ways. Either they get the NDP to support them or they'll pay the price. The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, speaking of clarity, will the Leader of the Bloc Québécois clarify what exactly he said or would say to hundreds of thousands of Quebecers who today benefit from free dental care that he voted against? The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. It's not really clear what was voted against or in favor of. I've never voted in favor of an intrusion on Quebec's jurisdiction. The Liberals have a block bill now in their hands. All it takes is a royal recommendation. They say that we're not going to get it, and so the block bill will never go through, and seniors will never get their money. That petty little game is what they want to play. If they are not willing to do this, then we're heading for an election. The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, the spectre of an election is not going to stop us from delivering the goods for Quebecers. That's a bit much. A vote is a very clear thing, I would say to the Bloc leader. It's not as ambiguous as he claims. When they vote, when the Bloc leader votes, he votes against lowering the retirement age to 65. He voted against increasing the GIS for poor seniors in Quebec. And when we brought in dental care, he voted against that too. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Let's repeat. The Bloc votes against all intrusions into Quebec's jurisdiction, whether that intrusion is all by itself or in an omnibus bill. C-319 is something that you guys voted for. So follow through here. Be consistent. Make sure it enters into force. Try to rectify the injustice that you yourselves created. So for once, try to vote a little bit intelligently and a little bit consistently. The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc leader has spent his entire life putting Quebecers' CPP in danger, and he voted against lowering the retirement age to 65, and that had nothing to do with Quebec's jurisdiction. He was voting against seniors when he voted against increasing the GIS. That had nothing to do with Quebec's jurisdiction, and still he voted against it. He voted against the well-being of Quebecers. He voted in favor of poverty among seniors in Quebec. The Bloc leader needs to be a bit consistent here and take responsibility for his actions. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, taxes are going up, costs are going up, crime is up, the pressure is up on the Liberals after 9 years of this Prime Minister with the support of the Bloc. People are living in trailers, they can't afford rent. People have written in saying, how am I supposed to afford food, insurance, and so on? This is the harsh reality of 9 years of this government with its Bloc friends. Does the Bloc realize that if they keep it up, it'll mean more and more poverty for Quebecers? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's no one here who believes the Conservative hypocrisy when they claim they're concerned about putting roofs over people's heads. The only thing they want to do is cut funding for construction of housing. They want to rip up all the agreements that have been signed with cities all over the country. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are going to continue building the housing people need. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and the pressure is building on the Liberal government. After 9 years, this Liberal government, supported by the Bloc, has led to disastrous consequences. People are crying for help. From Sherbrooke, the small food banks are starving. Imagine that, a food bank that's starving. But that's the situation. The centralizing, spendthrift Liberal government keeps on burning through money. But Canadians, Quebecers deserve to make a choice to have a common-sense government as quickly as possible. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd be pleased to answer an expert on infrastructure on the path to austerity. The Conservatives, look at what they've done in the regions when it comes to fisheries. They cut 80 million to science. They cut to small ports for small craft. They voted against investments in those small ports. They voted against support for families, against programs for seniors. That's all they know how to do, Mr. Speaker. All they can do is be austere for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, no sooner had we freed ourselves of the NDP, who supported the most disastrous government in history, than we found ourselves once again caught up in a saga with the Bloc Liberal coalition. What's the point of the Bloc when they vote for $500 billion of this Prime Minister's inflationary spending and his bloated bureaucracy in Ottawa, with Quebec's money adding 100,000 more public servants to the government machine? Mr. Speaker, we saw it yesterday. There's no real difference between the Bloc and the Liberals. So who or what does the Bloc Liberal coalition serve? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, my colleague can shout as loud as he wants, but Quebecers know very well. They remember what they did when they were in power. They made cuts to science, to family supports. They've cut everything they could because that's the only thing they know how to do is austerity. They don't know how to invest in the potential of Canadians, and that's precisely what they're going to do if they get another kick at the can. So Quebecers want nothing to do with the Conservatives. He can shout for all he's worth, but the Quebecers aren't listening to him. I'd just like to remind the member from Mégantic-L'Érable that after asking a question, it's important to allow someone else to answer.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc is costing Canadians a lot of money, and it's costing Quebecers a lot of money. We've witnessed the greatest expansion of the public service in history. More public services than ever, more scandals than ever. Now, they're keeping the Liberals alive. That's what the Bloc is doing. The Honourable Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, here we hear the voice of conservative austerity. People at home know what the Liberal Party has done. Investments are up. The economy is up. Quebecers know that with Liberals, we are building the future, whether it's the auto sector or elsewhere, manufacturing. We are building Canada for the 21st century. We will be there to defend Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton, Griesbach.
Over the span of 19 days, 7 Indigenous people were killed by police. Communities are disturbed, but unfortunately these tragedies are known all too well by Indigenous people. This is colonialism and systemic racism that continues to persist under consecutive governments. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit have the solutions to end this violence. No more Indigenous children getting a bullet instead of help. Why won't the Minister of Public Safety act to ensure accountability and justice for these families?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the comments and I appreciate the passion from my colleague, and I agree that we need to do more in this country around Indigenous policing. And that's why the Liberals, including myself, put forward a motion at the INAN Committee in April saying, let's study this. The NDP has the ability to put this forward the queue. They have the entire ability to have a unanimous motion here that says, let's address this. I'm talking about tangible solutions. I'd love to see the NDP join us with those tangible solutions and study this and hear from Indigenous leaders.
The Honourable Member from Nunavut.
Johannes Rivor sexually abused Inuit children in Nunavut for years. Canada refused to charge him for 30 years, and he died protected. Daughter of the late Marius Tungelik has asked the RCMP for his files, but they refuse to release it. This government must honor families, especially to those who suffered during residential schools. Will the Minister of Public Safety provide the documents, or will they help to keep the files hidden from this family?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question and raising these important issues with us in this place. Ensuring that justice is done for victims and their families is crucially important. It's something I know the minister takes incredibly seriously, and we will continue to work on this specific case with her. When it comes to dealing with systemic racism in policing, this is a crucial issue that we are focused on addressing. It is something we have made progress on, but by no means is it complete. There is much more work to do, and we are committed to doing it.
L'honorable député, the Honourable Member from London West.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Immigration and Citizenship introduced Bill C-71, and as Canadians, we can never take our rights for granted. We must remain vigilant when politicians, especially when the Leader of the Opposition suggests that he would use a notwithstanding clause if given the chance. Like the first generation limit introduced by the Conservatives is a concrete example of them taking away the rights of Canadians. Can the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship explain to this House the importance of Bill C-71?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration and Citizenship and Refugees.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for her personal passion in this file. What we see and what we are debating before this House is a bill that fixes the egregious breaches of the Charter that the Conservatives, including the Leader of the Opposition, perpetrated on women, on children of people born abroad. And this is something that we as a House need to fix. It is a Charter violation. It is a particular instance of the Leader of the Opposition, supported by his previous government, in breaching Charter rights. When Canadians say there's nothing to worry about, that isn't the case. There's lots to worry about with the Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Lisechma-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, what is the Bloc Québécois good for? Well, they're good for keeping the Liberals in power. They voted to save the Liberals more than 200 times. The Bloc Québécois voted for $500 billion in inflationary spending and helped to increase the ranks of the public service by 100,000. They pretend to help Quebecers, but they support this government. What did the Liberals promise the Bloc? The Honourable President of Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, we have the best public service in the world, and we are continuing to invest in Canadians, the most vulnerable, families, children, seniors. And what about the Conservatives? Every time they vote against these measures, we're here for Canadians. We're here to build a country, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member, Mr. Speaker, Bloc, Liberal, same thing. They help protect the Liberals and keep them in power. So more inflationary spending, a doubling debt. So the Bloc is voting for squandering Quebecers' money. The Bloc voted for the greatest expansion of the public service ever recorded. How did the Prime Minister convince the Bloc to support this government, which has been the most disastrous and the most centralizing in Canadian history? The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, the secret agenda is coming out. People are afraid of hundreds of thousands of layoffs, and here we have the confirmation made by my colleague across the way. Their secret agenda is to fire thousands and thousands of public servants here in this area, in this region, and across Canada. We have the future to care about. That member has just shown what the Conservatives' secret game is.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, grocery prices are up, time is up. According to Feed Ontario, more than 1 million people were forced to food banks just to feed their family. This is a record-shattering increase of 25%. This stark reality is fueled by the Liberal NDP carbon tax, which is driving up grocery prices. Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. Will the Prime Minister end this suffering and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Speaker, we all suffer when we know that some of our fellow Canadians are suffering. We've made historic investments as a government, delivering programs investing in Canadians' well-being. But let's not kid ourselves. The Conservatives would cut these very programs that Canadians are relying on. They would cut childcare. They would cut the food program for kids in school. And they would increase the retirement age. They would cut, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
Yes, we will cut. We will cut the carbon tax. The government's own statistics show that more than 9 million Canadians are suffering with food insecurity, struggling to put food on the table. After 9 years, the number of Canadians that are facing food insecurity is up a staggering 111%. These aren't just statistics. These are millions of parents who can't feed their kids. This is a result of the costly Liberal carbon tax and their NDP coalition partners that are driving up the costs on farmers, on truckers, and on food production. Stick a fork in this government and call a carbon tax election.
The Honourable Minister for Families.
And we've just heard it, Mr. Speaker. They have just admitted that they would cut the very programs that Canadian families are relying on. Families that are benefiting from...
Even Lawrence is laughing at you.
Colleagues, it's very difficult for me to hear. It's very difficult for me to hear the minister respond. I'm going to give the minister 30 seconds to respond to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there you have it. The Conservatives have just confirmed that they will cut the programs that Canadian families are relying on. $10 a day childcare, saving families thousands of dollars. National school food program, ensuring that children are not at school hungry. Mr. Speaker, you heard it here. They plan to cut the supports that Canadian families need.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, nothing is moving in the asylum seekers file. They promised, the Liberals promised, they would do something this fall, but here we are, it's fall, and no plan. Quebec is continuing to deal with the extraordinary number of asylum seekers. Let's be clear, Quebecers will continue to do their share, but they're tired of doing it alone. When will the government come up with its plan, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Mr. Speaker, we need a plan that will work for all of Canada. There are two provinces doing more than their fair share. That's Ontario and Quebec. Other provinces have to fall in line. We have to do things on an organizational level, but we shouldn't instrumentalize certain things, as some premiers are doing. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Well, let's talk about those provinces who are refusing to help Quebecers. Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, what do they have in common? Conservative premiers. And these conservative premiers are telling Quebecers, you deal with your problems, you deal with the asylum seekers. Now, let's be clear. The Minister of Immigration is responsible for this file. But what about all these conservative leaders who are pushing the problem over to Quebecers? The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, it's clear, it's dangerous to have politicians who make hay on the backs of asylum seekers.
Taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and after 9 years, time's up. Over the summer, I heard too many heartbreaking stories of folks struggling to get by. The NDP Liberals' carbon tax is making life unaffordable. Now, after voting for it 24 times, the NDP even say that they are abandoning the carbon tax. So my question to the minister is simple. Will the Liberals join their coalition partners to axe the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the price on pollution and the Canada Carbon Rebate are an affordability measure. 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back than they pay in the price on pollution, and the price on pollution is also an effective and efficient way to fight climate change. That's why progressives, including many who voted for the New Democratic Party in the last election, were shocked at the position that were taken by the leader of the New Democratic Party, walking away from a plan on climate change. Shame on them. They will have to explain that to their voters down the road.
The Honourable Member from Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, the PBO disputes those very things. The carbon tax is by design meant to raise prices, and the consequences are devastating. In Red Deer, Alberta, a city of only 100,000 people, have seen usage skyrocket in recent years to 30,000, and this year they're on track to have 40,000 individuals that need help from this food bank. That's in a city, Mr. Speaker, of less than 100,000 people. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is simple. Will the Liberals call a carbon tax election so that Canadians can decide to axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said a moment ago, the Canada Carbon Rebate and the price on pollution are in fact an affordability measure that help those that live on modest incomes the most. It is certainly true that 300 economists in this country have validated that to be true. The leader of the opposition and his minions across the way can make up facts, can talk about untruths, but at the end of the day, it is very clear that this is a progressive policy that helps us to fight climate change and address affordability concerns. I would ask the honourable member across the way to actually do his homework.
The Honourable Member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs up, crime's up, and guess what? Time is up. This costly coalition is hurting Canadians. Over 9 million Canadians don't know where their next meal is going to come from. That's 111% increase of Canadians facing food insecurity. And quadrupling the carbon tax will only make things worse. Canadians cannot afford any more media stunts from this costly coalition. Will the Prime Minister just end the suffering and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, as we've just returned from the summer break, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the programs that the Conservative government professes to want to cut. Over the summer, we've made a number of announcements on new, affordable $10 a day childcare spots. Oh, look at this, 600 new spots in BC, 950 new spots in Manitoba. Oh, here we are, 5,000 new spots over the next year in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. And what do the Conservatives say? No more affordable childcare.
Shame.
L'honorable député de Saint-Laurent.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, over the last year, Canadians expressed their concern with vehicle theft. We took their concerns to heart and acted. We have put new funding into the budget in order to fight vehicle theft. Can the Minister of Justice give us an idea of the measures taken to deal with this scourge? The Honourable Minister of Justice, Mr. Speaker, over the first half of this year, vehicle theft has fallen by 36% over last year. This follows on an increase in penalties and in the allocation of funds for border agents and for our police forces. After the cuts made by the last Conservative government, we are proud to be working for Quebecers and all Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Kildonan and St. Paul.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, and time's up. Under their watch, women and children are being victimized and violated by criminals that under Liberal policies are being let out on bail, house arrest, and parole. And after 9 years, the results are truly terrible, Mr. Speaker. Sexual assaults, for example, are up 75%, and sexual violations against children are up 120% under their watch, Mr. Speaker. When will the Liberals put the needs of the victims first and ensure jail, not bail, for repeat violent offenders?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, we take community safety extremely seriously. It is my top priority. What we have done since I've taken office is we've increased the penalties on people who would target individuals, including people who target people's automobiles. We have funded police to the tune of $161 million to assist them in their important work. What I can advise the member opposite is three important things. The people who are making decisions on bail are provincially appointed justices of the peace or provincial judges. The people who decide to appeal decisions on bail are provincial Crown attorneys. And the people who decide whether offenders have a place to go when they're denied bail, those are provincial correctional facilities. Talk to the provinces.
The Honourable Member from New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes up, costs up, crime's up, time's up. And so are job losses because of this incompetent Liberal fisheries minister. She doesn't listen to Atlantic Canada's fishing communities. The industry is left in the dark. Even former DFO scientists say she's playing politics with lives and livelihoods. In July, the fisheries minister cut the Bay of Fundy herring quota by 24%. The result, over 100 job losses. Will she do her job and restore these fish, reverse the cuts?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to assure my colleague that we have very close relationships with fishers, and for years now we have noted that herring stocks are suffering in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence. But he should think about shrimp in the St. Lawrence. We have helped in this area, contrary to the Conservatives, who would fish until every species is extinct. The herring stock has fallen, but we are not fishing it as much in order to conserve it.
The honourable member for colleagues. The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, fisheries crime is up, and the time is up. The situation in Nova Scotia's fishing communities, which has previously been described as lawlessness, continues to deteriorate. In spite of repeated warnings, the incompetent Minister of Fisheries and Oceans refuses to do anything. There is significant concern that the situation will spiral out of control. When will this woefully inadequate minister realize the importance of the Atlantic Canadian fishery and the very real threat to lives and livelihoods and do her job?
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that my colleague across the way has a very poor memory. We have only to think of the moratorium on deepwater fish and about what happened to shrimp last winter. It was catastrophic for our regions. Climate change in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, which is affecting all fish stocks. It's a real shame what I'm hearing across the way, and yet I'm not surprised because the Conservatives don't believe in climate change. We will make those decisions that are best for the industry.
Member from Kings Heads.
Speaker, this summer millions of Canadians tuned in to the CBC and Radio-Canada to cheer on Team Canada at the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris. Our athletes pushed limits, set new records, and brought us all together via the power of sport. In King's Hands, we are deeply proud of the Kennecook Kid, Wyatt Sanford, who won Canada's first Olympic bronze medal since 1996 when he took home the bronze. I even had the chance to spar and throw punches with him and the Prime Minister this summer. Can the Minister of Sport let this House know how we're supporting athletes like Wyatt so they can keep representing Canada with pride and excellence?
The Honourable Minister of Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Canadians from coast to coast to coast proudly celebrated the exceptional performances of Team Canada this past summer. Canadians won a record number of medals, inspired the next generation of Olympic and Paralympic athletes, and made us deeply proud. Our government supports athletes. We increased the amounts of the Athlete Assistance Program, which supports over 1,800 athletes monthly in 94 disciplines. Mr. Speaker, our athletes dream big and work hard, and we've got the results to prove it.
The honourable member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, $200 a month is not enough to live on. Yet that's what the Prime Minister has decided is enough for people with disabilities.
Shame.
While he caves to rich CEOs, he fails to protect the human rights of Canadians. And then there's the Conservatives, who always cut the supports people need.
Yep.
Both the Liberals and the Conservatives care more about their rich corporate donors than they do about Canadians. When will the Liberals get real and increase the Canada Disability Benefit and respect Canadians with disabilities?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister for Youth, Diversity and Disabilities.
Mr. Speaker, we put forward over $6 billion to create the first ever Canada Disability Benefit. But Mr. Speaker, we won't take any lessons from the NDP, who has started to take orders from the Conservative Party and abandon their commitments to delivering progressive policies. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're focused on delivering this historic benefit to Canadians.
The honourable member from Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, the City of Windsor is tired of being abused by this Liberal government when it comes to the border. A private American billionaire now wants to run hazardous material on the Ambassador Bridge. This is bad for the environment, bad for the economy, and an unnecessary risk for public safety. The Liberals tried passing the buck to the province, but Doug Ford doesn't care. My community deserves answers and a government that stands up for them, not the American billionaire who owns the bridge. Will the Liberals stop caving to the billionaire mayors and put an end to this disaster waiting to happen.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell the member what the Windsor is about. Windsor is about a revival, Mr. Speaker. With the investment we brought in Windsor, Windsor will never look the same again, Mr. Speaker. We have brought generational investment in this town. We have given hope to people. We are providing opportunities. We're providing training for the people. Windsor will be at the center again of the auto sector, Mr. Speaker. And this is thanks to a Liberal government in this team, Mr. Speaker. We should all cheer up for Canadians. Cheer up for Windsor and cheer up for the auto workers in this country.
We cheer for them.
Colleagues, and so brings to an end of oral questions. It being 3:15 p.m. pursuant to order made on Monday, September 16, 2024. I invite all honourable members to stand to observe a moment of